the best we could do. So this is our slides on the women's roles in the late 19th century England. So to begin, basically men and women had separate roles. Most of the time men were in like factories and women were left at home to attend to domestic duties.
So, poor women's roles in late 19th century England. So, for pay, they would work in factories and the homes of wealthier people, making/repairing shoes or garments, doing others' laundry, making food to sell in the markets or streets. For no pay, they would usually end up just working in their own home, cooking, cleaning, childcare, possibly tending like a small garden, depending on how much income they were getting. So for wages, the women were paid significantly less than men. The wage gap was almost 40%, which is pretty big. Women were seen as less significant and in turn were paid less. So overall, poor women's lives in the 19th century were hard. Most of them had husbands who had no job or a husband who was at the bottom where he worked and got little to no money. Most of these women had to take up jobs themselves while tagging along children who were not yet old enough to work.
So the wealthy women's roles in the late 19th century. First, the wealthy ones, they were homeschooled. They weren't allowed to go to public schools, and usually their first jobs were serving ladies in castles, and they were trained to do stuff such as preserving fruits and household management. And they were not allowed to become doctors or lawyers, and they weren't allowed to go to college, and they were homeschooled starting at the age of 5. So they were looked at as weak. They were best accepting and paying visits, having children, and organizing parties. Really stuff that people do that aren't skilled.
Even though they were really skilled and intelligent, they were just looked at as less, so they didn't get to do stuff.
And then in special cases, a woman who was a child of a nobleman could potentially become heiresses, so they could inherit their father's title, and the only exception was, of course, the crown, and the crown could be unconventionally passed down to the daughter. So the salary, basically this is saying that the queen would get $60,000 per year, and then a nobleman would get $15,000 to $25,000 per year, and it kind of goes down as the status of people go down.
What I'm going to be talking about in the 19th century was home-based work, domestic violence, and cultural taboos. Domestic service was a very, very popular thing in the 19th century, and that's basically maids, butlers, servants, gardeners. And today we usually think of those people only getting hired by the wealthy, but the middle class and part of the lower class was actually able to afford them, just less of them. And they would help with serving and just catering to the guests, basically. And that was a very common work for women. Domestic violence was sadly part of a very huge part of the 19th century. Both married and cohabiting couples, which is basically couples that aren't officially married, but they really didn't have much differences. They still lived together, they still had the same stressors, but poor households were more often for domestic abuse towards women, and this also happened in higher classes as well that were wed. And I have some pictures of a book that is talking about domestic violence, as well as a little snippet of a cover, which is wife beater publicly humiliated in England, as they should be. And then we have cultural taboos, which is basically social norms. And the Victorian women were supposed to be very pure and modest, basically how you think of the Queen nowadays. And they were supposed to have good etiquette and manners, so learning silverware, and they were held to a higher standard than guys were with that. A very big pastime during this time was horseback riding, And this was a very big problem because women had to stay modest. So they had to go to special tailors to get horseback riding clothes. Along with that, colonialism was something that was popular at the time, so world travel was a part of that. And women would often have to ride saddle side, basically two legs to one side instead of one-on-one, which can be dangerous at times. So, in conclusion, these actions were pushed women to fight for their basic human rights. Although this time was in the past, you can still see the social norms in the 20th century today.
Okay, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, I accidentally missed. So this slide wasn't in it. Now it is.
Basically, if you want to see that slide, just pause it and read it. It was a technical error, and yeah, so.
So there you go.
So.
Plus this.